Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Malaria Dialogues. I'm here in sunny Geneva to speak to Dr. Kesete Admasu, who's the CEO of the RBM Partnership to End Malaria, just ahead of the Malaria World Congress that's happening in Melbourne in just a few days. So let's go over and speak to Dr. Kesete. So we've all heard the main message of the latest World Malaria Report, that remarkable progress over the past 15 years, but now the warning that progress is stalling, and in some places even moving backwards. Do you feel we're at a vulnerable point in relation to malaria, or are you optimistic?
Yeah, I am both actually. I think the gains that we have made collectively can easily be reversed. History has taught us that painful lesson that if you lose sight of the bigger ambition, which is a world free from the burden of malaria, if complacency creeps in, if political commitment wanes, if financing declines,
Right.
then obviously all the gains that have been made over the last 2 decades or so could easily be wiped out.
Right.
So we are vulnerable in that sense.
Right.
I am optimistic because if we, get our acts together, focus, continue with the political commitment, then we can, accelerate the progress towards our ambitious 2030 goals.
Right. So a bit of both.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. With the upcoming African Union meeting, the recent Malaria Summit, the Malaria World Congress happening in Melbourne, it's quite a year for malaria commitment and solidarity. But why do you think it is that the malaria response is gaining momentum now? I mean, if we go back 10, 15 years, you could say it was relatively neglected. What do you think it is about now? Is it the promise of elimination? Is it political commitment? Why now?
I think we are increasingly talking about malaria elimination and the world free from the burden of malaria. The global technical strategy, which has set, this vision of having a world free from the burden of malaria. The action and investment to defeat malaria,
Right.
the strategic document of Zero Malaria Partnership,
Right.
has also clearly outlined the ambition for a malaria-free world. So that political commitment and aspiration is there. But secondly, I think if you particularly take the commitment this year, I would like to believe that it has been caused by the World Malaria Report, which has called for a focus and renewed commitment to make sure that our gains are sustained and the progress toward this, reducing the burden by 40% in 2020 and eliminating malaria from quite a number of countries has to be accelerated. So all these commitments are actually bringing a renewed vigor and commitment to this global commitment that our leaders have set for ourselves.
Right. So it's all just coming together at the same time.
Yes.
Right. I mean, at the moment, there's also a lot of talk about kind of global health and development context, and I'm thinking about health system strengthening, universal health coverage, the SDGs. What do you think is the kind of the impact of that global context on malaria elimination, and the other way around? What kind of contribution does malaria elimination make to those global frameworks?
Yeah, I think it is a very well known fact that malaria is a disease of poverty and it also results in poverty.
Right.
So the Sustainable Development Goals and the quest towards universal health coverage, strengthening and building a resilient system for health, building a global health security agenda and so on, will actually serve the cause of malaria. And I would like to say that malaria can serve actually at the sharp end of the stick in all these efforts, because, where do you see malaria most? It's in vulnerable places, it's in far-flung corners of malaria endemic countries. It affects poor people, it affects children, it affects, women. Outside of Africa, if you look at malaria in India, in the greater Mekong region, malaria is a tribal disease. So if you believe in the sustainable development goal agenda of leaving no one behind, malaria could serve as that litmus test where, a disease that affects, marginalized segments of the community could be served well. Secondly, malaria elimination requires a strong surveillance system, which is basically a core pillar in the global technical strategy. So building a strong surveillance system at the country, in malaria affected countries would actually, serve the world well, not only in dealing with malaria, but in dealing with all kinds of communicable pandemic diseases.
Yeah, great. We hear a lot about the possibility, and we've seen evidence in the past of kind of rapid resurgence. That makes malaria quite unique as a health issue, because we take the lid off, if we take our foot off of the accelerator, we know it's going to bounce back. How big a factor is that in the argument to kind of maintain pressure, to maintain momentum?
I think it is an important factor to consider, because the risk of malaria becoming a victim of its own success is there.
How do you mean?
It means, as you achieve good control, as you ensure access to effective treatments, malaria is no longer visible. As I said earlier, it becomes a disease of the poor, the voiceless. So it is considered by malaria endemic countries as disease of the past. Even with core donor countries, malaria, because it may not be as deadly as it used to be in the past, the funding level could easily decline. There are obviously emerging competing priorities, so resources, shift to these emerging priorities. So with all these factors combined, the risk of resurgence is real. Actually, if you think about it, a good, effective malaria control in high transmission settings takes away the immunity that would be there with high transmission settings. So that means that people will be vulnerable, they would easily die and develop, complicated forms of the disease easily, because that immunity is lost because of the good work that has been done over the years. So we have no alternative than to continue to apply the pressure until the world become malaria free. So that's an important factor to consider. But at the same time, in my opinion, a perfect storm is also in the making. If you look at the insecticide resistance, a widespread insecticide resistance all over Africa, plus the artemisinin resistance in the greater Mekong region. If you think about it, we have only one effective medicine in malaria, and a growing number of our vector control tools could be failing. So unless we act decisively in terms of increasing our pipelines, investing in research and development, and continue to have a strong surveillance system to detect these resistant mosquitoes or parasites, then those bad old days of high mortality from a failing drug and a failing vector control tools could become a reality again. So it's, the worry is real. The resurgence is real.
Right. So it's not just a question of keeping up the pressure with the tools we have, but continuing to innovate and moving forward.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. I think next week you'll be at an African Union meeting, and I believe some of the conversation will be about community engagement and whole of society approaches. Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of the needs and the opportunities we have for those kind of whole of society approaches, and how does that differ from kind of community engagement with other diseases like HIV, for example?
Yeah, the Zero Malaria Starts with Me campaign, which will be launched by the African Union as a Pan-African movement, is actually a homegrown best practice in Africa. It was
Right.
initially tested in Senegal, and it really brought all stakeholders together, the communities. It's the movement starts from a household. So the head of the household uh, pledged to take responsibility of consistently using the bed nets
Right.
and other tools
Right.
that are
Right.
available, be involved in modifying the environments that would create, favorable condition for the mosquitoes to breed. So as a household, as a family, they take responsibility because the collective ambition of a malaria-free country, a malaria-free community starts from the household. So
Right.
it really reignites community engagement in a manner that transfers responsibility and accountability to individuals and families and communities. So that's one. The second, the private sector in Senegal has been an active part of this movement. So I think engaging the private sector, not only in protecting their workers and the families and the
Right.
environment they operate in, but to be part of this collective good, which is to see a malaria-free country, a malaria-free continent. So it really galvanized the engagement of the private sector in a time-bound manner, which is
Right.
to achieve a malaria-free status in a given country based on
Right.
the aspirations and commitments of the country. The third component is, in fact, engaging the political leaders. So it starts from the head of government and state to the speakers of the house, to parliaments, to sub-regional, provincial, heads of governments. So these people commit and pledge that zero malaria starts with them. Zero
Right.
malaria is their responsibility. So we have seen parliamentarians pledging zero malaria starts with my constituency and try to engage a number of actors
Right.
to be part of this. And then, this engagement of political leaders at different levels gives us the opportunity to bring a truly multi-sectoral response
Right.
to the fight against malaria, because as we said, malaria is a disease of poverty. So any effort that tries to lift people out of poverty has to have malaria smart investments that
Right.
would accelerate the progress towards this malaria-free status. So it really galvanized a whole government, a whole community approach, which starting from the communities to political leaders, traditional leaders, religious leaders, business leaders to be part of this movement. And what we have, been lacking within the malaria space to a large extent, which is, the strength of the HIV response and to a certain extent the response in TB, is the engagement of civil societies and the representation of communities in an organized manner. So
Yeah.
this Zero Malaria Starts with Me will also bring that opportunity to bring civil societies, particularly grassroots community
Right.
groups like women groups, to be an active part of the
Yeah.
fight against malaria.
Yeah.
So we are truly excited on the potential this initiative would bring, and we are hoping that it will also be a global movement. So even if the African Union is launching it as a Pan-African movement,
Right.
we are working with some of our board members to take it to the Asia Pacific region as well, so that it becomes a truly global public-facing campaign that would sustain this renewed vigor and commitment that we have started to see in the malaria space.
Right.
Yeah.
And are other countries looking to Senegal and saying, we want to do that, we want to do the same?
Yes, yeah. But this year already Uganda has launched a similar campaign. Uganda calls it MAM, which is a better name, I have to say, than Zero Malaria Starts with Me. MAM is Mass Action Against Malaria, so it's a good acronym. But the principles are the same. It's engaging households, communities, leaders, private sector, and so on.
Yeah.
Mozambique, at the end of this month, the president would officially launch this campaign in Mozambique. And many countries have expressed their interest to do national launch immediately after the endorsement of the African Union heads of government. So yeah, it's a good opportunity, good time. Yeah.
It does sound like it does sound exciting and also very, very important. So.
Yes.
Well, next week we just heard today that there's going to be over 1,000 people gathering for the first Malaria World Conference in Melbourne in just a few days' time. I wonder what would be your message to that 1,000 people who are gathering there, and what do you hope will be the outcome of the conference?
I would say that the global malaria community has the aspiration of a malaria-free world. This is an important task, and I believe that there are different pathways to get to a malaria-free world. What would be important is which pathway we should take that would, on the way to being a malaria-free world, would help us to save many more lives. So that means we need to continue to focus on high-burden countries, to make sure that these high-burden countries also launch a subnational elimination strategy and continue to shrink the malaria map, not only globally, looking at it from a low transmission setting, moving towards high transmission setting, but we have to apply the pressure on the low transmission settings, as well as to continue to apply the pressure to reduce the burden substantially in high burden settings. So we should not engage in a dichotomy about the fight against malaria, but make sure that we collectively as global communities move towards a malaria-free world and apply a multi-pronged approach that would help us, when we get to that malaria-free world status, along the way saves millions of lives. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you have a productive trip to the AU meeting.
Thank you.
And we'll keep you posted with what happens in Melbourne. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much. Yeah.